It is Friday, May 19th. Let's talk PlayStation. Hello everyone, welcome back to another sick episode of LTPS. This was the week we were all waiting for, the confirmation of a PlayStation showcase. So we've got some stories about that and also a few other things as well, as always. But first, let's start with our PS Plus reminder. So if you haven't just yet, make sure you claim the May PS Plus Essential Games, get that done. And also, here is a reminder, a last call for some games leaving PS Plus Extra and Premium. These will presumably leave around the end of June, so like June 20th, the 21st, somewhere around there. There's no actual confirmed date on there, but it would probably happen around the time that the new games go up for the month of June. So most of these are going to be leaving, which is Kiwi, John Wick, Hex, both Red Faction PS2 games that are emulated on PS4. And then also, as an additional aside, we did spot a new game appearing on PSN. It's not live right now. This was mined from PS deals, but it's the PS1 game Herc's Adventures, which that is so cool. So another thing that I'll always advocate for when it comes to bringing back classic games on PS4, PS5 through the Classics program on Premium and also buying them a la carte. You know, get some games on there that if you want to buy them physically, they're very expensive. Herc's Adventures is like $150 something, very rare game. So also cool to have stuff like this, making it a lot more accessible if you're not into emulation or if you don't want to buy the game physically. Put it on PSN, let's get it done. Cool to see that one come back. Now, another PS Plus related news, there was a really strange issue going on for PS Plus Extra and Premium games on PS4, PS5, and it was on Wednesday night going into Thursday morning where a lot of people online were reporting that when they were playing these games, the console would tell them with a notification that the game was going to expire in about 15 minutes. And then once that time had passed, the game would basically suspend itself like you were hitting the PlayStation button. It wouldn't close, you could just start the game back immediately, so that's not really an issue. But what would become a problem is that it would do this every 15 minutes in a continuous cycle, forcing you out of the game in the middle of your gameplay. So yeah, it wasn't closing the game or anything, but that's just really annoying, obviously. So a lot of people were reporting this, multiple threads online. The PS5 subreddit had a pretty big thread going on, and a lot of folks were saying that it didn't matter if they logged in and out, restarted their console, re-downloaded the game. Usually the thing you always default to is restoring your licenses. Nothing was working, and even contacting PlayStation support. Obviously, they're not going to be able to do much, but I have noticed in recent years when it comes to any sort of licensing issue on PSN, which inevitably leads to people calling PlayStation support or contacting the chat service, it gets escalated to the right department, and usually it gets resolved fairly quickly. We're talking a few days at the most, I've noticed. So whether it is a weird licensing issue or in this case a weird back-end thing for Sony where this was hitting a lot of different titles on Extra or Premium, it already seems like that issue has been resolved. So if you ran into this issue, then that would explain why. So, because I tried to replicate it myself, it was not happening, so it seems like by the time I got to it, it was already fixed. But if you did run into that issue, it was definitely more a Sony problem and not something on your end. Now, the big news story this past week was the confirmation of a PlayStation showcase, finally. May 24th, going to be over an hour long, focusing primarily on PS5 and PSVR 2, with a bunch of new experiences from PlayStation Studios, third-party, and also independent developers. So this is the big live stream we've been talking about in recent weeks, where it was going to be late May, early June, so good to see it confirmed. And I'm sure a lot of you probably saw already, but we had a separate conversation on Wednesday, shortly after the event was confirmed. So that is the video to watch for, an extended talk on, what we should be expecting, what we should not expect, which I hope I'm wrong for a lot of those, but also a big list of general possibilities, kind of like 50-50. It could be there, it could not be there. But we do have some additional stories in relation to that. Most notably is Deviation Games, because the one story we did not get the chance to talk about just yet on LTPS is that their game with PlayStation is not looking too good. It's likely canceled based on what we know so far because, so what happened here is that initially this was spotted on Recent Era, and then sources speaking with VGC in a follow-up story indicates that Deviation has seen as many as 90 staff members laid off, which may have been connected to the story we talked about last week about Final Strike Games. That studio did have site visits to Deviation, so there was already speculation that they weren't doing their own game, but they were doing support work for Deviation's project. And the original source for that, at BogoRad222 on Twitter, they do clarify that between the two studios, this was one canceled game, which in this case it would have been primarily Deviation's title. Worth noting that, going back to September of last year, one of the co-founders, Jason Blundell, had left the studio, which at the time, that could be a bad thing. It could be a okay thing. I mean, usually it's like if there's this like mass exodus, so like a co-founder and a bunch of employees, that's obvious bad news, but one co-founder leaving might just, we could maybe chalk it up to creative differences or something. But also new studios, they tend to have a lot of turnover, but we had that, and now it's becoming increasingly clear that Sony did very much indeed have a routine portfolio checkup on all these projects that they're funding, because recently we've had a number of things like Media Molecule moving on to a new project and ending support for Dreams, also shutting down Pixel Opus, and then now we have this with the layoffs at Deviation. So with 90-something members leaving the studio, I mean, it's not confirmed as in Sony or Deviation has made a comment on this, but you don't lay off 90 people when the game is likely canceled. Or I should say, Sony is not going to be publishing this anymore. Deviation, as a new studio, they probably just have to be in sort of a very tight budget crunch scenario, down to a skeleton crew, and either scrap the project they have or try and find a new publisher. But I think we can safely say that for the time being, we are not going to see this game from Sony Interactive Entertainment. So, and that's how these things go. I think I predicted at the start of this year that Sony would acquire Deviation, which, it's like the strategy is still there where they're investing in new studios, but they just did that with, Fire Sprite and Haven, and not, Fire Sprite, Haven, and Firewalk, I should say, and not Deviation, clearly. So I guess we have our answer there. Now, not really a major news story here, but adding more credence to the site visits that PlayStation routinely does, which in this case would be Herman Hulst, the head of PS Studios, doing all this. He recently was visiting Santa Monica Studio, where he sent out this very cryptic but somewhat obvious tweet where he says, and I quote here, "Thanks for having me at Sony Santa Monica. Totally inspired by everything I saw today." So what did he see? I would imagine that is Cory Barlog's new game. I'm seeing a lot of people say that they hope it's going to show up at the showcase. Now, I don't think it will. It seems too soon for me, but I do sincerely hope I am wrong, because the prospect of, a new IP out of Santa Monica Studio is one that intrigues me greatly. As much as I love the God of War franchise, and a lot of the IP that all of PlayStation Studios puts out, it's always exciting to think about a studio that's known for doing one thing, pivoting to something else. So I do hope we see it, but I'm still I'm not certain that's going to be the case. Now, one thing I know a lot of people do want to see for the showcase, at least in terms of third party, is Grand Theft Auto 6, especially because we've had so many things happening recently, like, Rockstar's already acknowledged the game's development. We had the big leak where all that gameplay was released, and then most recently with Take-Two, they put out a press release where they say they're expecting to make a ridiculous sum of money for fiscal years 25 and 26, and their fiscal years are like Sony. They start in April, so the earliest this would begin is April 2024. And they're expecting like $8 billion in fiscal year 25 due to what they say is launching several groundbreaking titles that will set new standards for the industry. And, for comparison's sake, pre-Zynga acquisition, they were in the like $3 billion ballpark areas. So it's like, how are they going to get to $8 billion? Well, Grand Theft Auto 6 that'll certainly do it. And some folks are looking back at how Sony had the GTA 5 announcement for current gen machines at the last showcase, right? So I would say that's very unlikely to happen, given that this is Rockstar Games and the IP itself is massive. Rockstar does not need PlayStation, and there's absolutely no way Sony would have any sort of exclusivity or secure some kind of deal. I mean, maybe marketing rights, at the most. But this is something where throughout Rockstar history, they typically do these things on their own terms, and they'll hand out smaller announcements to platform holders like the one that Sony had with the 2021 showcase. I mean, the only other time I think this happened for a big, entry in the series was GTA 4 with the tattoo on Peter Moore's arm, but that just might be an outlier. The point is, I wouldn't think GTA 6 is going to be here. It's such a big game, and I don't think Sony would really want that either. That would sort of take away so much wind from, a lot of first-party announcements as well. So, at least for GTA 6, I would say don't expect it to be there. Wait for Rockstar to do the talking when they're ready. Now, one other third-party game that is worth bringing up is Persona 3, the remake. It's a rumor, but it's one of those things where it's been kind of an open secret. This game probably does exist, and we should not have to wait too long for it, where, given that game has a lot of PlayStation association, just worth mentioning that recently the original source for that rumor, the recent era user I'm a Hero 2, they more or less said the game is going to appear during Microsoft's briefing on June 11th. So, and it's not going to be exclusive, or rather it's not expected to be announced as an exclusive, but considering we saw how this was handled for the Persona 3 Portable and Persona 4 Golden console ports, where those were announced during Microsoft's event as well, but there was a weird embargo where the PS4 and Nintendo Switch versions were not allowed to be confirmed until like 48 hours had passed. Just keep that in mind when that event eventually comes, so we don't know how the embargo is going to be, or if there even is going to be one, how it's going to be handled when that announcement finally is confirmed. But for PlayStation fans looking for a proper Persona 3 remake, it'll likely come to PlayStation, but we just have to wait for Microsoft's briefing. But always worth watching all platform holder briefings, because there's always so much cool stuff coming out. Now, one other thing that we talked about on the Wednesday discussion video is how Sony might finally confirm all these rumored PS5 accessories, or they might also bring up Project Leonardo, which we can probably cross that off the list because they recently confirmed new details on the PS blog. So let's talk about that. It's no longer called Project Leonardo, it's now called simply the PlayStation Access Controller. Sony showed off new images and also the UI, and just as a general recap, each controller is going to include analog stick caps, standard, dome, and ball stick cap variants. There is a variety of button caps like pillow, flat, wide, overhang, or curve-shaped. There's also swappable button cap tags to mark which inputs they map to each button, and the controller can also be played on flat surfaces. You can orientate it to a full 360 degrees, or you can secure it to an amps mount or a tripod, and the distance of the stick can be adjusted as well. You can also use a combo of, say, one access controller and one DualSense, two access controllers, or at most two access controllers and a DualSense if needed. And there's also four 3.5mm jacks for expandable specialty switches as well. Sony showed off a lot of screenshots for the UI menu where, on a software level, there's a lot of customizations you can do for this controller, depending on whatever element you might have. One noteworthy option you can enable is called toggle mode, which acts basically like a caps lock for any input that you choose. So let's say it's physically challenging to continue holding down the trigger for a racing game or holding L3 to sprint in a first-person shooter. This is what you would use as a single button press for the intended behavior. Now, there's still no price or release, but Sony does say that's coming in the months ahead. Now, if there's one thing I can say about this controller, because obviously I cannot say much else about it, it's not really my place to do that. I would not need this controller, so it's for that community to, do some thorough testing and reviews, and based on whatever element somebody might have, it's up for them to determine its usability. And obviously it's great that Sony is investing heavily in this space for not only the controller, but just accessibility options in games. But I do really hope this thing is affordable, very price sensitive, especially for a community that oftentimes is faced with a lot of financial hardship, the kind that they didn't even ask for. So I hope that this thing is price sensitive, given that, some people might even need two of them, or, mounting it, expandable switches and things like that. So hopefully the pricing is good on this thing. Moving on to our next news story, Sony recently held their 2023 corporate strategy meeting. And there wasn't really anything new in there. One of those things where it's like the same stuff we've been hearing for the past 2, 3, 4 years now, probably longer. I mean, what company doesn't want to grow? Of course, it depends on how they outline the path towards that growth, but it's a lot of what we've heard, for a while now. I think the new thing in there is that and this is for the entire Sony group, but the company is considering doing a partial spinoff for their financial segment to take advantage of Japan's 2023 tax reform. More broadly speaking, Sony does reiterate the importance of having synergy across all their business segments, that primarily being games, pictures, music, and anime. So it's the same sort of slides and things that they've said before, like, investing in anime and PlayStation productions, boasting about the Last of Us numbers and all the success, and talking about how IP is a big driving factor behind all that. In terms of PlayStation, they do say they want to reach more active users through PS5 and PC. Big surprise there. Investing in live service, so again, showing off Bungie and how they're being integrated with Sony's upcoming live service games. Also investing in PS Studios. So again, a lot of stuff we've heard before. Next week, though, should be more interesting because that's where Sony's going to hold their business segment briefings. So that's where we should have Jim Ryan handle this part of the presentation to talk about the PlayStation business. Maybe we'll get, some slides in there that give us, I guess, new information to talk about. But otherwise, for this, not really a whole lot to go on beyond what we've already seen the past 2-3 years. Now, one unfortunate situation that came up recently was for Horizon Forbidden West, the Burning Shores DLC. Slight spoilers here, of course, so you might want to skip ahead if you don't want to hear about this, although we'll try and not say as much as we possibly can. But for those that know, this recently popped up where the vocalist, Julie Elvin, recently sent out a tweet where she says, and I quote here, "Since Horizon Forbidden West Burning Shores came out in April, I've continuously received angry DMs from gamers as my vocals are featured on a scene in the DLC they see as LGBTQ propaganda, receiving puking emojis, God won't forgive you, you destroyed Horizon, and more. The positive comments and influx of love absolutely outweighs the negative ones, but the continuous hateful DMs show how much still needs to change. Love is love. Story-wise, this scene made so much sense and I continue to stand with Guerrilla and I'm proud to be a part of it." It's like we said back when the DLC came out and there was review bombing on Metacritic. Not the first time, not going to be the last time either. And, it's one thing where it's review bombing a product on Metacritic, but it's something else entirely different when people are personally reaching out to the actors, the voice talent, even people that are just, they're simply providing their likeness to a character and they get these kind of messages. You do wish people could be better, but like Julie says, there's a lot of work to be done. And this is where the more pessimistic side of me comes out. I just can't see this ever getting better anytime soon, which I hate to say, but I just can't see it getting better. You would think that even if you don't like something, you just turn the other way, stop buying whatever thing you're mad at, and that would be the end of it. But, it has to get to something like this. And I'm sure it happens so much more often that a lot of, actors and voice talent does not want to admit in this industry and most other industries. Moving on to our latest update for the Microsoft acquisition of Activision Blizzard. Much like we discussed with the Reuters report, this one turned out to be true. On Monday, the European Commission approved Microsoft's merger with Activision Blizzard. The Commission says, and I quote here, "The commitments fully address the competition concerns identified by the Commission and represent a significant improvement for cloud gaming as compared to the current situation." Microsoft's Brad Smith then stated on Twitter, and I quote here, "The European Commission has required Microsoft to license popular Activision Blizzard games automatically to competing cloud gaming services. This will apply globally and will empower millions of consumers worldwide to play these games on any device they choose." So to clarify further, the Commission states that this would be a free license to consumers in the EEA that would allow them to stream via any cloud gaming service for all current and future ABK games they have a license for the next 10 years. Now, interestingly, the UK CMA, they did publish a response to this news, citing that the UK, US, and the EU identified cloud gaming as a concern, but the CMA still considers the cloud gaming market a rapidly evolving sector that needs a free market, one where Microsoft is not allowed to set the terms and conditions for it for the next 10 years. The CMA respects the European Commission's decision, but stands by their own. So there you go, everyone. If you were tired of hearing about this news, then well, you lost here because this officially means Microsoft is now going to be fighting this thing for, basically another year or about 8-9 months or something. It's going to be a long time because that means it's strictly the CMA that is holding this process up for Microsoft, I should say. Considering the FTC, I think at this point was just really hoping that there was going to be, that the other regulatory bodies were going to apply pressure, and then they can also look like they were the ones preventing this deal. But the EU, it's a lot of talk between the EU and the CMA, and how they both approach this and how they came to their own conclusions. But again, it's been my understanding between these two that the European Commission, much like the FTC, can be a very political process. The CMA, rather, considering they are independent and the UK government cannot actually step in and impede on this process, it is considered a much more thorough one that is not always influenced by, political outside forces and lobbying, right? So there's been a lot of heat on the CMA, but over time I've learned that the CMA are the ones that are, in a lot of cases, respected with how they go about their business. Now, they can make mistakes, obviously, and if there is one, I'm sure it would be discovered during this process for the appeal, but we can say that this is going to go on for a very long time now. Now, this one I thought was certainly worth bringing up for what is a very iconic figure in PlayStation history. The voice actor for Crash Bandicoot and many other Crash Bandicoot characters, Brendan O'Brien, has recently passed away at the age of 60. So rest in peace, Brendan, because while your voice has been, I think, a pivotal moment and something that lives rent-free in many people's heads decades later, it's such an iconic voice with the whoa and all the other little kooky noises that came out of those PS1 era Crash Bandicoot games. But RIP and condolences out to Brendan O'Brien and his family. Now, with all that said, it is time for Let's Talk Plus, the weekly Let's Talk PlayStation giveaway, where one of you can win a $10 PSN code. I would like to congratulate this viewer right here. I'll be contacting you very soon via email or Twitter, and if you'd like to win a $10 PSN code, it's very easy. You can follow the link down below, supporting this channel a number of ways can gain you an entry, and I'll announce the winner next week because I'm trying to help pay for your games. Those are some of the news stories from this past week that I wanted to talk about to you all, and our Tuesday video was looking into the PS5 hours played thing on the UI, where a lot of people I've had a lot of people ask in like 2 years, like, why is it always wrong or inaccurate? So we didn't really have that scientific of a test, but we try to explain, why it tends to be really weird and off, and, obviously there's a lot of fringe cases, so it's not going to apply to everyone, but I think it does answer generally why it seems to be off, so you can go check that out. But Wednesday was also our conversation about the PlayStation Showcase. So here's what our plan is next week. Won't do a Tuesday video because we're going to have the showcase on Wednesday, which I know people want the live streaming thing. I'm not set up for live streaming just yet. I really got to get around to doing that. There's some adjustments I need to make to my desk to make it a bit more conducive to a good setup. So again, we'll probably have to do something where I'll record recap impressions, things like that, right after the event. And I know people like the reactions too, so I'll record my reactions and maybe I'll upload that separately on the weekend or something. I don't really know, but we'll have to do that for now. But that's what we should be doing next week, and that is pretty much it. So that concludes this week's episode of Let's Talk PlayStation. I'm Ryan Benecki. Thank you all so much for talking with me, and I will see you all next Friday.